The High Lady's fingers didn't tremble, though the gravity well of the High Council's judgment pressed down with the weight of a dying star. Beneath the shimmering arches of the Ethelgard hegemony, the air usually tasted of ozone and ancient victory. Today, it tasted of the human sweat and the copper tang of fear. Elara stood before the Archon, her silhouette a sharp fracture in the crystal light of the hall, her silver hair unmoving like frozen water. "If you value their lives so much," Archon Valerius boomed, his voice vibrating through the energy thrones of the 7 rulers, "then you shall become the anchor for their insignificance. You will bind your house to their dirt," which meant the readings were wrong. The council had not intended to execute her for the rebellion. They intended to erase her through proximity. 7 days later, the smell of toasted synthetic protein drifted through the cramped mess hall of Solstice Prime. It was a flat, uninspiring scent, yet the humans clustered around the heaters as if the aroma itself could ward off the glacial wind howling against the hull. Commander Kalen Voss sat across from Elara, his hands stained with the black grease of a failing life support system. Between them sat a dented brass flask, its surface scarred by years of misuse. He didn't offer her a throne. He didn't even offer her a bow. Instead, he pushed a plastic tray toward her with a weary, lopsided grin. "Eat," Voss said. "Pancakes aren't much, but they beat breathing recycled oxygen on an empty stomach." The council watched this interaction through the remote link of the Sentinel drones. We observed the way the High Lady looked at the tray, her optical sensors struggling to categorize the pancake as anything other than a caloric necessity. It was a thermal inefficiency. To our collective understanding, the High Lady should have been revolted by the grime under the commander's fingernails or the way the human children laughed while the Voidstalker alarms sat silent in the distance. A low hum, then nothing. The sound of the broken water pump had finally ceased. Voss looked at the ceiling, his jaw tightening in a way that signaled a shift in priority. He wasn't looking at Elara as a royal exile. He was looking at her as a potential pair of hands. "Can you hold a plasma torch?" he asked, standing up and wiping his palms on his trousers. "I am a daughter of the hegemony," Elara replied, her voice cold as the space between galaxies. "I do not mend pipes." "On Solstice Prime," Voss countered, grabbing the dented flask and tucking it into his belt. "If you don't mend the pipes, you don't breathe the air. Your choice, lady." He walked away without waiting for her assent. The council's shared processing core flared with a flicker of indignation. A human dared to turn his back? It was a breach of every protocol we had recorded in 4 millennia of expansion. Yet, Elara did not call for his execution. She watched the way his boots clicked against the deck plating, her blue skin glowing with a faint, uncertain rhythm. The high-alert pulse of the station's core hummed through the council's link, a frantic electronic heartbeat, which meant the readings were wrong. The pressure differential was not a standard leak. It was a catastrophic structural failure that the human Voss was currently sprinting toward with a primitive welding kit. We watched through the lens of a hovering drone as the Voidstalker's first boarding pod slammed into the side of the mess hall. It was a jagged, obsidian needle that punctured the hull with a shriek of tortured alloy. Voss didn't stop to calculate the odds or wait for a tactical readout from the hegemony. He simply handed the dented brass flask to a trembling child, grabbed a heavy-duty kinetic rifle, and stood in the path of the breach. The human body is a fragile vessel of water and carbon. Yet, as the obsidian door of the pod hissed open and 3 armored marauders stepped into the freezing mist, Voss moved with a terrifying, fluid momentum that defied his species' biological limitations. He fired until the mag was dry, then swung the rifle like a club, his face a mask of primal, protective fury. It was at the 75% mark of the encounter that our collective processing shifted. Humans exist in a state of constant battle against the second law of thermodynamics, fighting a universe that wants to cool their blood and scatter their atoms into the dark. They do not accept the inevitable decay of the system. They treat every moment as a high-stakes negotiation with death itself. Elara didn't hide in the bunker. She stood behind the makeshift barricade, her Ethelgard technology finally synchronized with the station's crude defenses. She watched Voss take a blade to the shoulder to keep a marauder away from the infirmary. She saw the blood on the deck. "Why?" she shouted over the roar of the venting atmosphere. Voss didn't look back. "Because they're mine." 2 hours later, the Voidstalkers were a memory of drifting debris. The station was quiet, save for the rhythmic tap-tap-tap of the broken water pump that had somehow started again in the lower decks. Voss sat on a crate, his shoulder bandaged in clean white strips of cloth, his eyes fixed on the stars. The council watched him through Alara's eyes. We saw the way he gripped the dented brass flask, his knuckles white. The human trait of protective love was a dark mirror to our own sense of duty. It was a beautiful, irrational obsession that made them capable of destroying entire worlds just to keep one small corner of a glacier warm. Archon Valerius broke the silence of the link. "They are not animals." "No," another voice replied. "They are much more dangerous." Alara sat beside Voss. She didn't say a word. She simply watched the twin moons of Solstice Prime rise over the jagged horizon, their light reflecting off the scarred surface of the brass flask.